The truck's engine screamed before anyone understood why. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Not the commuters flowing like water around the subway plaza, not the vendors packing up their carts in the fading gold of a Seoul afternoon, not even the boy standing at the crosswalk in his crisp academy uniform. 3 seconds was all it would take, and somewhere in the crowd, an old woman selling bracelets was already counting them down. But that came later. First, there was Han Seung-ho and the empire he had built out of grief. Han Seung-ho did not walk so much as arrive. Even here, in a plaza thick with commuters and street food steam, people parted for him the way they might part for weather. He was 50 years old, silver-templed, his charcoal coat cut so precisely it looked less like clothing than architecture. Mirae Holdings had his name stitched into half the skyline behind him, and he had paid for every centimeter of it with things he didn't like to name out loud. If your heart is already racing for Han the young boy and Amina the old woman, don't let it stop here. Like this video so more people find their story. Subscribe and tap that notification bell, because Chapter 2 is coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss the moment. Before we go any further, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from tonight? His grandson, Han Jun, 8 years old, all elbows and unclipped shoelaces, trotted to keep pace beside him. Grandfather, you're walking fast again. I walk at the correct speed. You are simply small. It should have sounded cruel. It didn't, not quite. There was something underneath it, something that never made it to his face. Since his son's funeral 3 years ago, Seung-ho had learned to say almost nothing that meant anything, and to mean everything he never said. They passed the noodle cart. They passed the flower stall. They passed, as they did every Friday, Mama Amina and Jerry. She sat on an overturned crate at the mouth of the plaza, a woman well into her 60s with silver threading through cropped hair, her table lined with bracelets she strung herself, bright beads in reds and golds that looked, in this gray commuter tide, like something that had wandered in from another world entirely. Most people's eyes slid past her the way water slides past a stone. Seung-ho's did too, every week, with the practiced ease of a man who had trained himself not to see anyone he hadn't decided to see. This week, she spoke before he could complete the ritual. Sir, Amina held up a bracelet, beads the color of a sunset, for the boy, for good fortune. Seung-ho did not slow. I don't buy luck. It is not so expensive as you think. Everything has a price. He said it the way other men might recite an address, automatic, unexamined. Charity teaches people to wait for what they should be earning. Something flickered across her face. Not hurt, exactly. Recognition, maybe. The particular tiredness of a woman who had heard that sentence, in one form or another, from 100 men just like him. She said. Just that. And let him go. Han Jun glanced back at her once, the way children do, without judgment, only curiosity, before his grandfather's hand found his shoulder and steered him on. The plaza thinned as the afternoon aged into evening. Amina began folding her cloth, stacking bracelets into a chipped tin box she had carried across 2 countries and one ocean of grief no one asked her about. Her knees complained. Her back complained louder. She was reaching for the last handful of beads when the voices reached her. 2 men, dark suits, the kind of expensive quiet that money buys. They had stopped near the pillar behind her stall, close enough that their words came to her in pieces, carried on the same wind that stirred the plaza's flags. Confirmed the route. Every Friday, same time. And the boy? Collateral. Unfortunate, but the inheritance doesn't clear if the boy... Don't say it here. Fine. We make it look natural. An accident. Simple. Amina's hands went still over the tin box. She did not turn around. She had learned, in 60-some years and 2 continents, that the moment you let danger see your face, it stopped being something you could survive. Instead, she watched their shoes. Watched them turn, unhurried, and walk in the exact direction Han Seung-ho and his grandson had just gone. She should have told herself it was none of her business. She had learned that lesson too, more than once, in places where minding your business was the only thing that kept you breathing. But her feet were already moving, tin box abandoned mid-thought on the crate, weaving through the thinning crowd, keeping the men's charcoal shoulders in sight, the way a woman keeps a storm in sight, not because she wants to walk into it, but because she cannot afford to look away. They stopped at the plaza's far edge, watching, waiting. Amina's pulse ticked up in her throat. An accident, they had said. Make it look natural. She thought of the boy's unclipped shoelaces. She thought of the old man's cold, correct voice. I don't buy luck. And found, to her own quiet surprise, that some small ember of her wanted to prove him wrong about exactly that. She stayed. She didn't know what she meant to do. She only knew she couldn't make herself leave. Across the plaza, oblivious, Han Seung-ho reached the crosswalk with his grandson's hand, finally, grudgingly, folded into his own. The signal had not yet changed. June swung their joined hands once, humming some tuneless thing from school, and Seung-ho let him, which was as close to tenderness as the old man ever allowed himself in public. Neither of them heard the engine. It came from the side street, first a rumor of sound and then a certainty, a delivery truck picking up speed, where no delivery truck should have been picking up speed, its trajectory bending, with the terrible precision of intention, toward the white lines of the crosswalk, where a boy stood humming and an old man stood looking at nothing but his watch. Amina saw it half a second before anyone screamed. She dropped the last bracelet from her hand. It hit the pavement and rolled, forgotten, into the gutter. And then she ran. Knees, back, 60-some years, all of it thrown aside like something she no longer had time to carry. Straight toward the only two people in the plaza who didn't yet know they needed saving. There was no time to think. There was only the truck and the boy, and Amina's body already deciding for her. She hit Han-jun like a wave hits a pier. Full weight, no hesitation, both of them airborne for the half-second it took gravity to remember them, then slamming down onto the concrete beyond the railing in a tangle of limbs and scattered beads that had spilled loose from her pocket. His school bag flew one way, her sandal flew the other, and the world, for one suspended breath, went perfectly silent. Then it wasn't silent at all. The security team moved before their brains caught up to their training. Two men in dark suits, Han's own, the ones paid to notice everything and understand nothing in the moment that mattered, saw an unfamiliar woman seize the young heir of Mirae Holdings and throw him to the ground. They didn't see the truck. They didn't see the railing. They saw a stranger's hands on a child who wasn't hers, and that was enough. She's got the boy. The larger one reached her first, wrenching her arm behind her back with a force that tore a cry from her throat, driving her shoulder into the pavement hard enough that her vision sparked white at the edges. Don't move. Don't you move. The truck. Amina gasped, cheek pressed to concrete, one hand still locked around June's small wrist, as if letting go might undo the last 3 seconds entirely. The truck. Nobody heard her. Not yet. Because at that exact moment, with a shriek of metal that seemed to tear the evening itself in half, the delivery truck plowed through the crosswalk and into the railing, the very railing June had been standing against 10 seconds earlier, folding steel like paper, glass raining across the asphalt in a bright, terrible confetti. The plaza went to pieces. Someone screamed. Someone else was already filming, phone raised with the reflexive cruelty of instinct. Han Seung-ho stood frozen, for the first time in longer than he could remember, his ears ringing, his son's face flashing behind his eyes, for reasons he didn't let himself examine, and then, finally, his body caught up to the moment. Let her go. His voice cracked across the plaza like something breaking. The security guard froze, hand still locked on Amina's wrist. Sir, I said let her go. Seung-ho was already moving, already on his knees on the filthy pavement in a coat that cost more than most people's monthly wages, pulling his grandson into his arms with a desperation that had no room left in it for dignity. June was crying, more from shock than pain, small fists twisting into his grandfather's lapels. Seung-ho held him the way a man holds something he has just understood. For the first time, he could actually lose. Only then did he look at the woman on the ground. They gave her a folding chair near the ambulance, a paramedic pressing gauze to the scrape along her elbow, while phones all around the plaza lit up with a video already spreading faster than the actual bleeding. An elderly street vendor throwing herself between a truck and a billionaire's grandson, captured from 4 different angles, uploaded before the dust had settled. Han Seung-ho crouched in front of her chair. It cost him something to do that, to lower himself, in public, to a woman whose name he hadn't bothered to learn in 3 years of walking past her stall. "You saved him." His voice, when it came, didn't sound like his own. "You saved my grandson's life." "He is a good boy." Amina winced as the paramedic tightened the gauze. "Kicks like one too." It wasn't quite a joke. He almost smiled anyway, and hated that he almost did, because there was no room in him right now for anything except the cold thing coiling in his chest. "Why," he said carefully, "were you already running? Before the truck came into view. I saw you. You were running before anyone else even reacted." Amina looked at him for a long moment, the particular, weighing look of someone deciding whether a man deserves the truth before he's earned it. "Because it was not an accident," she said. "I heard men talking, this afternoon, behind my stall. Talking. 2 men. Suits. They said your grandson's name. No." She corrected herself, frowning, chasing the memory. "They did not say his name. They said the boy. They said inheritance. They said—" Her jaw tightened. "Make it look natural." Seung-ho felt something go very still and very cold behind his ribs. "You're mistaken. I am not a woman who invents things, Mr. Han. People hear what frightens them. It's not—" He stopped himself, started again, quieter. "It's not a criticism. It happens to everyone." "One of them," Amina said, ignoring that entirely, "was tall, gray at the temples, though he is not old. A scar, here." She touched 2 fingers just beneath her own left eyebrow. "Small, like a comma. He wore his jacket unbuttoned even though it was cold, like a man who wants everyone to see the suit is expensive." Seung-ho's blood went to ice, because that was Deputy Director Choi Young-sik, head of corporate strategy, a man who had, 4 hours earlier, sat 2 seats down from Seung-ho in a locked boardroom on the 11th floor of Mirae Tower, a meeting that had not been on any public calendar, attended by 9 people, none of whom should have had any reason to be discussing his grandson at all. There was no way this woman could have known that. No way she could have simply guessed a scar, a habit, an unbuttoned jacket, unless she had actually stood close enough to see it. Which meant every polite dismissal forming in his mouth died there, unsaid. "Say that again," he told her, very quietly. "Everything you heard, word for word." And as she began to speak, Han Seung-ho understood, with the particular clarity that arrives only after nearly losing everything, that the danger to his family hadn't come from outside Mirae Holdings at all. It was already inside the building, already inside the boardroom, already, perhaps, closer to him than he could afford to believe. The guest house had no name on any deed Han Seung-ho would admit to signing. It sat behind a second gate most of his own staff didn't know existed, glass and pale stone tucked into a fold of the estate's back garden, the kind of place built for visiting dignitaries who needed to disappear for a night without disappearing from anyone's calendar. He had brought Amina there instead of to the police station, in the back seat of an unmarked car, past a security detail he'd personally hand-picked for their silence rather than their competence. "You understand," he said, as the gate closed behind them with a soft, final click, "that I could still be wrong to trust you." "You could." Amina eased herself onto the pale sofa like a woman testing ice on a lake, not quite believing it would hold her weight. "But you already decided, or I would be in a police cell instead of drinking your very good tea." He didn't answer that. He poured the tea himself, which surprised them both. She took the phone from the inner pocket of her cardigan, an old thing, cracked screen, a rubber band holding the back cover on, and set it on the glass table between them like it might go off. "I did not mean to record it," she said. "I was reaching for my beads. My hand hit the button by mistake. I did not even know until later, when I was too afraid to sleep, and I played it back to see if I had imagined the whole thing." Han Seung-ho stared at the phone the way a man stares at a door he isn't sure he wants opened. "Play it." The audio was thin, wind-scarred, half swallowed by plaza noise, but underneath the static, two voices threaded through, clipped and businesslike, discussing murder the way other men discussed lunch reservations. Confirmed for Inheritance Day, everyone will be watching the ceremony, not the boy. And if he doesn't cooperate? Then the child must disappear, quietly. If this fails, everything goes to Plan B. The recording cut out in a burst of static that might have been footsteps, might have been wind, might have been Amina's own trembling hand pulling away. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Han's jaw had gone tight enough to ache. When he finally looked up, something in his face had cracked open, not fully, just at the seams, just enough that she could see the fear underneath the discipline. Inheritance Day, he said, low. That's the shareholders' ceremony. 3 weeks from now, my father built that ceremony to honor the founding of the company. It's sacred to this family. Then it is a good day to hide a murder, Amina said gently. Everyone is looking at the stage. No one is looking at the child. He flinched at the word murder spoken so plainly, in that calm, unhurried voice, as if she'd said rain or Tuesday. He stopped, started again, quieter, the words coming out ragged around the edges. I don't know how to protect what I don't understand. I have spent 30 years learning how to run a company. Nobody taught me how to find out which of my own people wants my grandson dead. It was the most honest sentence he had said to another living person in 3 years, and it seemed to cost him something physical to say it. His hands, when he set down his teacup, were not quite steady. Kang Ji-hoon had run Han's security for 11 years, ever since the founding chairman had personally recruited him out of the military. A quiet, watchful man who moved through Mirae Tower like he already knew where every camera pointed, because he did. It was Ji-hoon who discovered, at 2 in the morning, hunched over 3 monitors in a windowless server room lit only by the cold blue glow of screens, that 18 minutes of plaza surveillance footage had been deleted before the police request even came through. Not corrupted, not lost, deleted, deliberately, cleanly, by someone with access credentials that shouldn't have existed outside this room. His face, in the monitor's glow, betrayed nothing. That was the problem with Ji-hoon. It never did. He pulled access logs until his eyes burned, cross-referencing badge swipes against server timestamps, and every thread he pulled led, however faintly, toward CFO Choi Min-jae's floor. Nothing conclusive. Nothing he could put in front of the chairman without risking his own credibility on a hunch. But something. At 11 that night, Ji-hoon left the tower through the service entrance instead of the front, got into a car that wasn't his, and drove 11 minutes to a hotel bar in Gangnam, where Choi Min-jae was already waiting in a corner booth, 2 drinks deep, his tie loosened like a man unraveling in slow motion. "You're late," Min-jae said. "I'm careful," Ji-hoon said. "There's a difference." Neither man smiled. Whatever passed between them across that booth. A folder slid an inch across the table, a name spoken too low for the bartender to catch. The audience would not yet understand. Only that Ji-hoon, loyal for 11 years, was hiding something now. And that his hands, steady through firefights and boardroom crises alike, trembled faintly around his glass in a way 11 years of discipline had never allowed before. Han Seung-ho was still awake at midnight, alone in his study, when the envelope arrived. No courier, no signature required, simply left inside his mailbox by hands no camera had caught. Inside, photographs gone brittle with age, incident reports stamped with a company seal he recognized instantly because it was, in a smaller, harsher form, his own father's seal. A factory, a collapsed retaining wall, a death toll that had never appeared in any annual report, buried 30 years deep beneath the version of Mirae Holdings the world had been allowed to know. A single line, typed, unsigned, sat atop the papers like a blade laid gently on a table. Your family has buried bodies before. Ask yourself who else remembers. Han Seung-ho sat very still in the lamplight, the papers trembling, almost imperceptibly, in his hands, and understood, for the second time in 3 days, that the ground beneath his family had never been as solid as he'd built his entire life to believe. Kang Ji-hoon had not slept in 2 nights, and it was starting to show in the small ways discipline usually hid. He met Min Jae in the same hotel bar as before, except this time he didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the booth with his coat still buttoned, like a man who wanted to believe he could still walk away from this conversation clean. "I need to know what I'm part of," Ji-hoon said. His voice was flat, controlled, the way it always was, except for the muscle ticking once, twice, in his jaw. "You said information. You said gaps in a schedule. Nothing more." Min Jae didn't look up from his glass. "That's still all it is." "Then why," Ji-hoon said, very quietly, "is the boy's grandmother's stall in a police report about attempted vehicular homicide?" The silence that followed had weight. It pressed on the room like humidity before a storm. "You should go home, Ji-hoon." Min Jae finally lifted his eyes, and there was something almost gentle in them, which made it worse. "Go be with your wife. Let the hospital bills stop being your problem." That was the arrangement. "The arrangement," Ji-hoon repeated, and his hands, steady through 11 years of firefights, steady through every crisis this family had ever handed him, were not steady now. The arrangement was never supposed to include a child. "Wasn't it?" Min Jae's voice dropped, almost kind, almost cruel in exactly the same breath. "You knew what gaps meant. You just didn't want to know it out loud." Ji-hoon's chest went tight, a cold sweat prickling under his collar despite the bar's warm light. He thought of his wife, thin and pale in a hospital bed that cost more per night than most people made in a month, her hand finding his in the dark and squeezing like an apology. Neither of them had the strength to speak aloud. He thought of Han Jun's unclipped shoelaces. He thought that a man could tell himself 100 small lies, one on top of the other, and call the pile of them a good enough reason. "I have to stop this," he said. "You should have thought of that," Min Jae said, "before you took the money." Ji-hoon was 3 minutes from calling Han when his phone buzzed with a message from the academy's front office. Routine, administrative, the kind of message that shouldn't have made his blood run cold, and did anyway. Han Jun did not board the pickup vehicle. "Please confirm alternate arrangement." There was no alternate arrangement. There had never been an alternate arrangement. Han Seung-ho received the same news 11 minutes later, standing in his study under the same lamp that had lit the anonymous envelope 2 nights before, and something in him that had held steady through funerals and boardrooms and a truck tearing through a crosswalk simply gave way. "Find him." His voice didn't rise. It went low instead, low and terrible, each word bitten off at the root. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care who you have to wake up. Find my grandson." When Ji-hoon arrived at the estate 20 minutes later, pale, unshaven, his tie already gone, Han met him in the front hall with his hands clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles had gone white. "You," Han said, "you did this." "Sir, 11 years. Han's voice cracked down the middle, grief and fury tangled so completely neither man could have separated them. 11 years. I trusted you with his life, and you? I didn't know." Ji-hoon's composure, the thing that had defined him for over a decade, finally broke apart in real time, his voice climbing, cracking, nothing controlled left in it at all. "I swear to you, I didn't know what it would become. I thought I was buying my wife 6 more months. I never thought it would be him." Amina stepped out from the sitting room doorway, where she had been listening in silence, her cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders like armor. "Look at his hands," she said quietly. Both men turned. "Look," she said again. "A guilty man's hands go still. He has already made his peace with what he did. This man's hands are shaking like a man who has not slept, who is trying to fix something he cannot forgive himself for breaking." She looked at Han steadily. "I do not know this man. I know fear when I see it. And that," she nodded at Ji-hoon, "is fear, not guilt." Han wanted, badly, to dismiss her. He had built a fortune on trusting numbers over feelings, contracts over instinct. But the ember she'd lit in him 3 nights ago at a bracelet stall was still burning, and he found, to his own quiet horror, that he believed her more than he believed his own fury. "Then help me," Han said to Ji-hoon, each word dragged out of him like a confession. "Help me find him. and then we will decide what you did or didn't know. The full shape of the conspiracy arrived within the hour, delivered in fragments by a trembling junior analyst Ji-hoon had pressured into talking. Choi Min-jae intended to eliminate every legal heir standing between himself and controlling interest in Mirae Holdings, and when that was done, to release the buried factory records, not out of conscience, but as leverage, a blade held permanently over whatever remained of the Han family name. Han sat with that knowledge like a stone in his chest. Protect the company's reputation and let his grandson's abduction disappear into a manufactured story. Or confess everything, the cover-up, his father's sins, 30 years of silence, and watch the empire he'd spent his entire life building collapse. In the same week he might lose the only family he had left. He didn't get to finish deciding. His phone rang. Ji-hoon's name lit the screen. Han answered before the second ring finished, his hand no steadier than the man's had been in the front hall minutes ago. "I found him," Ji-hoon said, breathless, already moving, already halfway out a door somewhere across the city. "I know where they're holding Jun." He gave the address in 4 clipped words. Then, quieter, almost afraid to say it, "Sir, we don't have much time." The warehouse smelled of rust and diesel and old rain, the kind of place chosen precisely because no one would think to look there. 3 shell companies removed from any name that could be traced back to Choi Min-jae, its windows boarded, its only light a single caged bulb swinging over a folding chair where an 8-year-old boy sat with his hands zip-tied and his chin lifted in the particular defiant stillness of a child too frightened to cry. Ji-hoon went in first. That was the choice he made, the one that would define everything after. Not a grand speech, not a redemption arc announced out loud, just a man walking through a rusted door ahead of the people he'd wronged, because it was the only apology his body knew how to make. "Min-jae," his voice carried flat across the concrete. "Let the boy go." Min-jae turned from where he'd been checking his watch, unbothered, a man still counting minutes like they belonged to him. "You brought him here." He nodded past Ji-hoon toward the doorway, where Han's silhouette had just filled the frame, backlit by headlights, his shadow stretching long and jagged across the warehouse floor. That wasn't the plan. "Neither was murdering a child," Ji-hoon said. "I'm done following your plan." Something shifted in Min-jae's face, not fear yet, but the first crack of a man realizing the floor beneath him had quietly become someone else's. "You'll go to prison for this. You understand that. There's no version of tonight where you walk away clean." "I was never going to walk away clean." Ji-hoon's hands, for the first time in this entire ordeal, had gone still. Not the stillness of guilt, but the strange, terrible calm of a man who has finally stopped running from a decision. "But he gets to walk away. That's the only part I get to choose anymore." He moved between Min-jae and the boy. It cost him. Min-jae's hand went for the pistol at his waistband, and for one held breath the whole warehouse seemed to stop breathing with him. The swinging bulb, the diesel air, Han's shout tearing across the concrete, Jun's small whimper, until Ji-hoon closed the distance and drove Min-jae into a support pillar hard enough to send the gun skittering into shadow, and then it was just 2 men and 11 years of buried arithmetic settling itself in the dark. By the time Han reached his grandson and cut the zip ties with shaking hands, Min-jae was face down on the concrete beneath Ji-hoon's knee, and Jun was sobbing into his grandfather's coat, and somewhere outside, sirens were already threading closer through the night. The recording did the rest. Amina's cracked phone, combined with the financial trail investigators pulled from Min-jae's shell companies, and Ji-hoon's sworn testimony, given freely, without a lawyer's careful softening, closed the case with a completeness that left no room for the story to be quietly buried, the way Mirae Holdings had buried things before. Han did not wait for the truth about the factory to surface on its own. He called a press conference himself, stood at a podium under harsh fluorescent light that showed every line the last week had carved into his face, and told the country what his father had hidden 30 years ago, the collapsed wall, the deaths, the money spent making the story disappear instead of making it right. "I built my life," he said, his voice steady even as his hands, gripping the podium's edges, were not, on the belief that silence was the same thing as strength. I was wrong. I am accountable. My family is accountable. And I would rather lose everything I built than keep it built on that particular silence. Mirae Holdings lost value that quarter. Han lost the chairmanship he'd held for 3 decades. What remained, in the months after, was smaller, leaner, independently governed, watched closely by regulators who no longer took the Han name at its word. He found, to his own surprise, that he could breathe easier inside it anyway. Ji-hoon sat beside his wife's hospital bed the night before his sentencing hearing, her hand thin and warm in his, color slowly returning to her face with each round of treatment Han had quietly, insistently continued funding. Not as forgiveness, exactly, but as something adjacent to it, something neither man had found the right word for yet. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Keep paying, after everything." "I know." Ji-hoon pressed his forehead briefly to the back of her hand. "I'm not doing it for him to like me again. I'm doing it because for once, I want to do the right thing without checking what it costs first." Whatever waited for him in the morning, and he suspected it would not be gentle, he faced it, for the first time in over a decade, without anything left to hide. Amina's shop opened on a narrow street 2 blocks from the subway plaza, its windows strung with beads in every color she'd ever loved, reds and golds and deep sea-blue turquoise, and a small hand-painted sign that simply read, "Naries." Inside, 3 young women from her building, immigrants all, sat at a long table learning the particular rhythm of stringing beads the way her own mother had taught her decades and an ocean ago. Han's quiet intervention had regularized her papers within weeks. The shop itself, she'd insisted on funding herself, penny by penny, refusing every offer he made beyond that first necessary door. "I did not save your grandson for money," she'd told him, not unkindly, the day she signed the lease. "I know," he'd said. "That's exactly why I keep offering it." Months later, on an ordinary Friday, golden hour spilled long and warm across the subway plaza, gilding the crowd the way it had never quite bothered to before. Han Seung-ho walked toward the academy gate with his grandson's hand, unprompted, folded into his own, and this time, when they reached the familiar stretch of pavement near Amina's old spot, he didn't walk past. He stopped. Amina looked up from behind her old display, moved now to a spot just outside her shop's door, a small act of stubborn nostalgia, and something like a smile tugged at her mouth, sly and unhurried. "You are stopping," she said. "This is new." "I've been told," Han said, and something almost like humor moved beneath the words, "that I am occasionally capable of change." Occasionally, she held up a bracelet, the same sunset beads from that very first Friday, as if she'd been keeping this exact one, waiting. "For good fortune?" "For good fortune," he agreed, and paid for it without negotiating the price, which she noted, silently, as its own kind of miracle. June tugged his sleeve as they walked away, watching his grandfather fasten the beads around his own wrist with a care that looked almost foreign on a man who measured most things in ledgers. "Why do you want it now?" June asked. "You said you didn't buy luck." Han glanced back once, just once, toward the shop window, where Amina had already returned to her table, laughing at something one of her students said, golden light catching the silver in her hair. "The most valuable things in life," he said quietly, "are often offered by the people the world refuses to see." June considered that with the serious, uncomplicated weight children give to things they don't yet fully understand. "Are we going to keep coming here?" he asked. Han Seung-ho looked at the shop window one more time before they turned the corner and found, to his own quiet astonishment, that he already knew the answer. "Every Friday," he said, "for as long as she'll have us."